Welcome to the Practice You podcast. My name is Elena Brower. Together, we'll explore and enjoy content and conversations around mastering transitions in our relations, our wellness, our careers, our families, and especially in our missions and visions. You are invited to learn and love and listen with me. Welcome to Practice You. Welcome back to the podcast. I have today with me award-winning producer, director, and cinematographer who is well known the worldwide for his work in time-lapse photography. We're about to learn all about Louie Schwartzberg. Welcome to the podcast, Louie.
It's great to be here. Love it.
Thank you. Thank you. I've just finished screening your upcoming film, which is called Fantastic Fungi, which I always thought it was fungi, but it's fungi. Can you confirm that? Is that true?
Academics prefer fungi, but I can tell you're a fun gal and I'm a fun guy. So
hey, there we go.
Yeah.
We are in the pocket now. So Louie and I, just for full disclosure, have had a talk. We talked about 2 months ago, I believe, to just get to know each other. I found you initially through Katie Hess's work with Lotus Way, through your photography in her book, Flower Evolution. So big shout out to Katie.
Yeah.
Beautiful, stunning photography. I've just never seen anything like it before or since. And I thought I might share that you are the only filmmaker in the world who's been shooting time-lapse 24/7 continuously over 4 decades. You are a visual artist breaking barriers. You are telling stories that celebrate life, that reveal the mystery and the wisdom of nature. And this is something that I feel we don't actually talk about enough. We get so caught up in our minds. And so I really enjoyed the film. I have so many questions. The mushrooms as the digestive tracts of the forests. I can't get over. The time lapses were plenty in this film. And so if you're even remotely connected to plants at all, definitely watch Fantastic Fungi. I think most notable aspect was watching how the mushrooms actually serve to decompose dead and dying organisms and then serve those molecules back into the life cycle. And I thought it might be interesting to ask you how long those time lapses take and how you did it.
Well, a lot of what I film in a studio, because obviously if it's going to go on for a week or weeks, then we have to have control of the lighting, control of the wind, control of the fact that nobody would steal your camera if you left it outdoors for a month. And a lot of those decomposition shots took 3 to 4 weeks. The only drag is sometimes it can get a little stinky.
Right.
But it's a beautiful thing. I mean, the idea of decomposition can either be seen as the end of life or it can be seen as the beginning of life. And if you open your mind to that, basically it's just a transition. It's a circle of life. And where does it begin? Where does it end? It's connected. And I find it to be extraordinarily beautiful just observing how things break down.
I was finding it interesting. Michael Pollan mentioned in the film that plants have evolved to catch your eye. Mushrooms are not evolved to catch your eye. They're evolved to serve very particular functions. And without fungi, the plant matter would actually build up and choke the earth.
Right.
And what the fungi do is break down all the plant matter to give way to new life, as you just said. So I just found that to be so interesting.
Well, look at what we're doing now in our own, social fabric. I mean, we finally realized that we have to recycle, right? If we don't recycle, it creates a giant environmental problem.
Yeah.
So nature invented that billions of years ago, the fact that everything is recycled. There is no waste. I mean, the beauty of nature, it doesn't waste a single molecule. So all those, ingredients, that is the building blocks of life, comes from, the fact that fungi and mycelium break things down into their tiny little components. Some of it is food that they eat, just like we need food that we eat. And then those elements of carbon, etc., are stored in the ground for new life to emerge.
And I loved watching Paul Stamets. Am I saying his name right?
Stamets,
Thank you. If you haven't seen it and this interests you and you're listening, his TED Paul Stamets Stamets did a TED Talk in 2008. He's featured quite often in this film. He basically had bacteria.
fungi.
He had fungi grow on a pile of an oil spill. Basically, he learned in this particular experiment, because they tried two other things to break it down. The mycelium actually dissolved, broke down the carbon hydrogen bonds in the oil,
Yeah.
and grew an entire field of mushrooms on this oil spill that actually served to break down the toxicity that would have
Mhm.
obviously affected the entire ecology surrounding that spill, and made that pile of oil an oasis of life.
Yeah, because the birds come in, insects come in, to eat the mushrooms, and then seeds are dropped, and before you know it, nature has this incredible resiliency to replenish itself, and there you go, life emerges all over again.
And he did this by inoculating the oil spill with mushroom spores, basically.
Yeah. Yes.
This this really woke me up. I am so remiss that I haven't seen it in the last decade. I had no idea that that happened. And why aren't we doing more of this with more of the toxic waste that we have on planet Earth? That's my question.
Well, that is a valid question. I think that what we've discovered, like with the big oil spill that happened in the Gulf, giant mega companies, chemical companies come in and go, "Oh, I've got a solution for that. I've got this other toxic chemical that can dissolve the oil spill,
That I can
and
sell to you.
that I'll sell to you, for billions of dollars. That'll break up the oil, but guess what? It'll poison the ocean at the same time." So these are like mega contracts, and then we're in that cycle of just industrial waste damaging our environment and our ecosystems.
It's tremendous. We have also in the film the biomimicry inventor. I'm not recalling his name right now, but
Jay Harmon.
Jay Harmon, who says that all of us are just like the little networks of mycelium that live, all the threads like neural pathways underneath the floor of the forest. I loved you included a couple of images of a person stepping on the forest floor, and how that would light up all of these little, what looked like neural pathways in the brain beneath each footstep.
Yeah, the mycelium network is like the internet under the ground. It's a shared economy, not based on greed, but of sharing nutrients between plants and trees. It creates a community that is called a forest. And it's beautiful because when that happens, it allows ecosystems to flourish, which should be a model, I think, for how we could live our lives above the ground. James Cameron used that idea from the scientists in my film, which really is the core essence of the spiritual vibe in Avatar, the whole idea of the mother tree. So in Susan Simard's research, she discovered, and this just warms your heart, that a mother tree will actually favor its baby and give it extra nutrients so that it can grow and prosper. So the this idea that trees can either communicate to each other, or they are, similar to us in our kind of narrow minded point of view that we're like the only really conscious creatures on the planet. It really broadens your perspective to realize that this idea of love happens in plants as much as it happens with people.
Yeah. I noticed also and noted that the mother trees, when insects come, invasive insects come, they will actually sort of push. I don't know if I understood this well, but push the baby tree farther afield from them so that they are not affected by
Yeah.
the insects. Is that true?
Yeah, well, they give them a warning signal, and then also they want them to Well, just like, parents today, I think you want your kids to leave the nest
Yeah.
and, and stand up on your own 2 feet. So encouraging them to move further away where there's less competition for resources is another reason why that happens. And again, to protect them from invasive, pests and other diseases, so they communicate with each other. That's really the point.
And I also found it interesting that the plants, they take in all the carbon dioxide and they put about 70% of it below the ground, stored
Mhm.
in the cell walls of the fungi, which fuels this whole microbial community and then stabilizes, this is the key, the carbon in the soil, which is moving from plant to plant and saving the planet. Why is this information not being more utilized right now?
I'm not sure quite why it's not being utilized. Let's just say it's like the duh principle. It's so fucking obvious.
Yeah,
It's right under our feet.
I know.
So, this is the greatest natural solution for climate change. So, what people need to understand is every time we exhale CO2, carbon dioxide. Plants take in carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen. What a beautiful symbiotic relationship. Well, what's happening is that when a plant and the tree inhales the CO2, the oxygen is being released and the carbon is going, through the branch, down the trunk of the tree, into its roots, and at the tip of the roots, it's transferred into the mycelium network where it's stored there for thousands of years. I mean, this is where oil comes from, decomposition of organic matter, coal. And what we've done is we've dug up all that carbon, we've burned it, put it up into the atmosphere, and have created a giant imbalance. So, what we need to do, we just got to get out of the way and let nature do its thing. If we stopped putting CO2 into the atmosphere, scientists have said that we could actually clean the atmosphere in as little as 5 years. That's a big if we could stop doing it. But the point is, we have a mechanism in place, we have a process that enables us to clean the atmosphere if we stop polluting tomorrow.
What do you think? I mean, if you could, off the top of your head, think of the biggest offenders, without like pointing fingers or anything, but a general overview of the general industry that is the biggest offender.
You know, I would say, well, there's a lot, obviously, but industrial agriculture, because it relates maybe specifically to our topic of the mycelium network.
Yes.
So the positive things we can do is like no-till agriculture.
Mm.
You don't want to break up that network under the ground. Stop using pesticides. They kill the mycelium under the ground. GMOs. Stop using fossil fuel fertilizers because you've got this symbiotic relationship where the mycelium and the trees and plants are sharing nutrients with one another. Well, if you put the fertilizer in there, you've broken up that relationship. And then when that fertilizer is gone, where's the mycelium?
Right.
So, industrial agriculture is a big problem. Also, look at how much we produce in terms of industrial livestock.
Mm.
I mean, how much land we have converted into pens that just store animals. That soil is dead.
Ugh.
There's nothing underneath the hooves of those cows and pigs that covers a giant chunk of the earth. There's nothing alive beneath their feet. This is a big problem, and
Wow.
we just need to let nature, as Susan Simard says in my movie, let nature do its thing.
Yeah.
If we get it, we just got to get out of the way and let nature heal itself.
Right. I loved her pieces in the film, actually. Couple more things I want to talk to you about the film, and then I want to talk about your sort of bigger picture, dreaming, envisioning for yourself. What were your favorite two shots of the film in the final edit?
Mm.
I'm curious to hear.
Yeah, well, I think one of the hardest ones is following the CO2 molecule into a leaf, and then having it be a point of view ride down the trunk of a tree into the roots into the mycelium network,
Yes.
and then you go underground. I mean, I think that really visualizes it for people because you can explain it, and you sort of might get it. But to actually be a CO2 molecule and carbon traveling under the ground and have it be in this magical mystery world of interconnectivity, of interconnection, of interdependence. What a beautiful feeling you get, because that feeling is a homecoming. I think it warms your heart to realize how everything is connected.
Mhm.
And when you have that feeling in your heart, you actually almost lose the fear of dying.
This makes me think that if you're a teacher listening to this, particularly a teacher of children or college age humans, this is a really important film for you to watch first and then to show to as many students as you can to bring this upcoming generation of humans to an understanding of the interdependence that we need to be fostering in this network underground. I think that's a really important point.
And especially, and it's obvious, we've become so disconnected from nature and very addicted to our digital devices, which basically has created more loneliness and more separation.
Yeah,
So when you mentioned, pointing this out to young people, they're the ones that are growing up in this new world where they're basically looking at their phone the majority of the time,
I know.
and they really need to understand that interconnectedness. And what's kind of beautiful is because they do rely so much on the internet, there's a gateway for them to understand it without being judgmental and saying, don't look at your phone, don't connect to your friends. We can basically say, look, this is how nature works. It is all about building community, because communities survive better than individuals. So I think it's an antidote to this disconnected, digital, hyperactive world that young people are growing up today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I can't wait to show this to my kid. In a certain section of the film, there's an entire conversation about, we'll call them magic mushrooms or psilocybin.
Mhm.
It's a topic I take really seriously. One, I'm sober 5 years from all substances that are in any way altering to my mind. And um, I'm really proud of that because it just presented a real big problem for me. But I always speak very candidly. Most of my addiction was to marijuana. But I will say that at certain junctures throughout my adult life, there were micro doses of psilocybin that I was experimenting with that absolutely expanded my brain, that absolutely triggered vast spaces of creativity and even bigger thinking in a much more sort of literal and practical way than I ever would have experienced without those experiences. And I want to say that even though I no longer do any of this personally, I felt very validated by the section of the film where we talked about how the mushrooms create the mushrooms that grow out of the cow patties, that they induce synesthesia, that they open up floodgates of information, and that they actually have been found in clinical trials to increase the size of the brain by expanding the neural synaptic capacity of the brain. And I felt like that was actually totally true for me. And it made me long slightly for past times, I have to say. But I feel like that the psilocybin does give a lot of meaning for certain people. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, no way, I don't do drugs or I don't use those things, or,
Mm,
you have some sort of aversion or story about psilocybin, I just want you to possibly, and this is coming from a sober person,
yeah,
open your mind and consider that these networks, these possibilities, this feeling of vastness, this vision that I have for myself was born of a lot of those moments where I felt the effect of this, what I'll call medicine in my brain, opening me up to see other potentialities that I hadn't seen before. I,
yeah,
I'm not advocating, but I am saying it really did happen for me that way.
yeah. Well, first of all, I would just want to make one minor correction. I mean, it doesn't really expand the size of your brain. That was part of the Stone Ape hypothesis, that billion years ago that the brain expanded, and they think that could be the missing link between the primate and the Homo sapien species.
I see.
But to address what you're talking about in terms of your own personal experience, what science has shown is that it depresses what's called the default mode network. That's sort of like the organizer or the COO in your brain. So basically, you're not under the influence of a drug. What you're basically doing is similar to what deep meditation does, which is getting rid of the monkey mind. So parts of the brain are speaking to each other that normally don't communicate. That music can be emotion, and emotion can be color. And what you're doing is you're sort of temporarily kind of, allowing neural networks to connect to each other that don't normally do. And what that can be is an extremely enlightening experience. It can open up things that might have been buried, whether it's trauma, which is what they use it for example, with people with PTSD. It's used at Johns Hopkins with people that get a severe cancer diagnosis to relieve that anxiety. At the University of Alabama, they use it to treat addiction for cocaine. They also use it to treat addiction with tobacco and alcoholism. So I wouldn't even call it a drug at all. I mean, this is really a sacred medicine
Yeah.
that if used in the right place and setting, and it's not addictive because typically most people who have, done mushrooms, including myself, you do it maybe once or twice, and once you get it, you don't need to do it again. The good metaphor is it's almost like you're at base camp ready to climb Mount Everest, and you get a quick little helicopter ride up to the top, and you get to see what the mountaintop looks like. But then you come down to base camp, and then the next day you've got to do the work. You got to do the journey. You've got to integrate whatever it inspired you and make that a part of your life. So, having one aha moment after another isn't going to, improve your life
Mm.
and or change the world. What you need to do is get a glimpse of what is possible and then go out and do the work and make it happen.
I had a book a long time ago. I still have it actually called The Master Game by Robert S. DeRopp. And it makes the same sort of argument that with any sort of mind altering substance, to have the experience is, yes, part of it. And then to integrate it and make it a part of your daily practical integrated life, take that information and use it properly. That's sort of the magic and the master game itself, actually.
We do it at Johns Hopkins and at the clinics that are opening up where you can have a medicinal treatment. There's, an introduction phase, like a day one. Day two, you might take the journey. And then day three is integration.
Hmm.
And that's part of the program. And that's how it is structured inside of a medical clinical environment.
I was taken by that aspect of the film when we looked into the medical and clinical trials that were done with real people, real humans. I felt like that was a really important aspect to watch and to see, and how these people who were in a great deal of pain and suffering, who used the medicine to open their minds up to see the much bigger picture, broader perspective, and were able to get clear.
Yeah. And the most important part that you hear is there's this overwhelming feeling of love, of compassion. And for those that are maybe battling with things like cancer, they lose their fear of
Yeah.
dying. It makes them more comfortable with living because they lose their fear of dying. So imagine you have this terrible, diagnosis that you've got cancer. So you're fighting that on a physical level. But imagine what your head must be going through, knowing that there's this like, terrible diagnosis. So mentally, you're not really helping the body because the mind and body are connected because you're freaked out. Right? I mean, it's totally understandable that you'd be freaked out. And if you're thinking about dying, do you really want to be thinking about heaven and hell? I mean, what kind of a story is that to help you feel good about a potential change in your life? Maybe you'll survive, maybe you won't. But my God, wouldn't it be nice to feel comfortable that maybe you're connected to every molecule in the universe instead of some kind of fairy tale horrific story of heaven and hell. So I think it's a major, major breakthrough.
Mm.
I mean, I'm sure everybody has this existential anxiety. What happens when you die? If this can kind of make people feel more comfortable, not that they have the answer, but they just feel more relaxed about that issue, what a gift.
Yeah. I feel like this brings us right back to the very beginning, which is that the medicine, in whatever form we get to experience it, the fungi, are just showing us the interconnectedness and the interdependence of things. And once we know about that, death does not serve as a scare tactic anymore. It's just a part of it.
If the theme of your podcast is transition,
Right.
it's just another it's just another transition. Let's try to look at it that way
Yeah.
and get rid of a guy hanging on a cross, with nails in him.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a much more positive image.
I think the last thing I wanted to talk about with respect to the film was the whole conversation about mushrooms as immune boosting.
Hmm.
And how it started was that the reishi mushroom in particular helps the immunity both of people, humans, and the bees, which are very
Hmm.
seriously endangered right now. And Paul Stamets has apparently 5 patents for, I'm hoping I'm saying this right, entomopathogenic fungi
Yeah.
that infect insects that will someday serve as a natural extermination function for like things like fire ants, bed bugs, mosquitoes, and that
Termites.
termites, right?
Yeah.
Which is nice because we're using a lot of chemicals, and those chemicals are building up toxicity in our bodies. Anytime our homes are treated, anytime our lawns are treated, all that stuff just builds up.
Well, I think it's pretty remarkable. When I was working with Paul on the movie, I was finishing up a feature film, a Disney nature feature film called Wings of Life, which was all about pollinators, bees, bats, hummingbirds, butterflies, making love to flowers.
Mm.
It's narrated by Meryl Streep, and she tells the story from the point of view of a flower. So I learned that pollination is critical to our survival because all of the healthy food we need to eat, fruits, nuts, berries, vegetables, seeds, all comes from pollinating plants. 70% of your diet, if you're vegan, 100% of your diet comes from pollinating plants. And then, when I knew that, we're dealing with this thing called colony collapse disorder, the fact that the bees are disappearing, I asked Paul, I said, come on, Paul, you're a scientist, you're brilliant. You could come up with a solution to save the bees. And sure enough, he did a little bit of research. He came up with a mushroom extract that is put into the sugar water that is fed to the beehives that are used in agricultural giant plantations, which is where we are in today's world. Thousands of acres of almond trees, a monoculture. But nevertheless, it's building up the immunity in the bees so that they can fight the viruses that are now believed to be the major cause of colony collapse disorder. Now, viruses and these mites have always been there. The bees are suffering because their immunity has been diminished from environmental degradation, from pesticides, from having to live in a monoculture, from being shipped 50,000 miles a year on the back of a flatbed truck
Mm.
from one monoculture to another. They're working overtime to give us the food that we need to eat, and their resilience is being diminished tremendously. And so now, just like with AIDS, if you have AIDS, you don't die of AIDS, you die of complications like pneumonia and other things because of your resistance and your immunity being so diminished. And that's what's happening to the bees. So this is pretty remarkable that the mushrooms have the ability to build the immunity not only in bees but also in humans.
And I think also that when we're working with this sort of whole conversation, we can go back to the basically discovery of penicillin, 1920, when we figured out that penicillin is made from mold that actually protects us. And I actually can't take antibiotics because I get really, really sick. But it's interesting to see the trajectory and the chronology of all of this.
Well, because penicillin has saved more lives than any other medicine in the history of mankind. So, why is that? It's because we evolved from fungi. So, billions of years ago, there was fungi and plants. Fungi then, split in two directions, where animals evolved from fungi. So that means that the viruses that attack them and attack us, we share similar DNA, and what they try to do is with their enzymes fight those viruses and bacteria. So they help us because they're, let's face it, 10 or 20% of your body is made up of fungi. Your whole intestinal tract. If it didn't have fungi, that microbiome, you wouldn't be able to digest food. So we have this symbiotic relationship with them, and the viruses they have to defend themselves against are the similar ones that we have to defend ourselves against, which is why penicillin is a powerful antibiotic.
Got it. Wow. I would love to learn more about your other work outside of Fantastic Fungi, even though this is really the thrust of this. Can you talk to us about your top 3 projects in your history and current, and why?
I would say when I graduated UCLA, I wanted to shoot high quality 35 millimeter movie film, but I couldn't afford it. Film cost $100 a minute for purchase, develop, and process back then. And so one of the things I developed was this idea of filming time lapse in 35 millimeter, which nobody had done before. So they had these old, big, heavy animation cameras with an AC powered motor, and I wanted to take the camera outdoors to shoot nature. So a friend of mine made electric guitars for the Grateful Dead. He helped me build a battery-powered motor that I could take these heavy cameras outdoors. I put still camera lenses on them, and I started to chase the light. Shooting things like sunrises and sunsets and fog, shafts of light, flowers, etc. And so the economics was one part. The other part of it was, and the most important part, it filled my sense of wonder to be able to look at life from a different point of view of time, the way a flower looks at life, the way a hummingbird looks at life, which is slow motion, to be able to look at things in a different time frame and a different scale broadens your perspective about life on our planet. And I'm just trying to explore the rhythms and patterns that touch my soul as an artist.
Mm,
And indirectly, it has certainly inspired a lot of scientists that said, "Oh my God, I never saw that before," which has been great. So that has led me on this idea of really looking to understand nature's intelligence. So whether I tell it from the story of the POV of a flower, with Meryl Streep's voice, or through the point of view of a mushroom with Brie Larson's voice.
nice.
Again, emphasizing the feminine side of nature, which is about relationships, which is about symbiosis. It's about regeneration, rebirth, not the macho story of predator versus prey, survival of the fittest, doggy dog story that gets ratings on Shark Week. I'm trying to really look at the billions of little intersections that makes the world go round. And so with my imagery, in addition to doing these films, I've started to introduce it into healthcare. At the Jacobs Medical Center at the University of California in San Diego, we've actually introduced it in every patient room because they had like an iPad that enabled the patient to control the lighting and shades in the room, and also enabled them to track their own medical record and procedures. And I suggested, let's give patients the power of choice. Let them have the ability to say, where in the world do I want to go to be healed? And the choices that are offered are forest, ocean, desert, flowers, underwater, and they get like a 20-minute video with music, no narration, to kind of go on their own personal journey. And I'm hoping that we'll collect data to show that it lowers heart rate, respiration rate, less addiction to painkillers, better sleep, and shorter hospital stays.
Yeah.
The beauty of nature, I believe, in and of itself, is a healing modality. I think beauty is nature's tool for survival because we protect what we fall in love with. We're hardwired to do that. And it is medicine. So ask yourself this question: why is it that there is no healing modality for vision? We have it for touch, massage. You have it for smell, aromatherapy. We have it for music, right? Guided meditation. We have it for every sensory receptor except vision. And vision is where you get 80% of your information.
Wow. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
But beauty, as the beauty of nature, the beauty of nature as a healing modality, that is something that really speaks. There's a friend of mine just sent me today on Instagram a flower called the Mahameru flower that blossoms in the Himalayas once every 400 years.
Well,
Mahameru, Mahameru, I believe. It is the most stunning, and it's blossoming right now.
that flower is a sexual organ of a plant. That's why I've been shooting flowers nonstop for 4 decades. And I thought that, just being, seduced by their color and taste, touch, and smell was enough. But then, when I heard that the bees were disappearing, I realized there was a greater mission in what I was doing, which is to be able to tell this a love story of how bees and flowers have co-evolved over 50 million years. They're the love messengers that moved the pollen from one plant to another because they don't have legs, and at the same time, the bee is getting food to feed its brood, its babies.
Right.
What a beautiful story that they're enabling each other and they're doing it unknowingly. I don't think the bee is thinking about, oh, I got to move that, sperm of the pollen from one plant to another. I'm just gathering food for my baby.
Right. It's not a I don't think the brain capacity of the bee is such that we're anthropomorphizing them and thinking that they're thinking like we are.
Yeah,
It's just it's an imperative.
but yeah, but in the beauty of nature, like we have these symbiotic relationships where it's not always quid pro quo. It's not always you do this, I do that. I help you, you help me, knowingly. It's the fabric of life is so beautiful that even when we're doing things for ourselves, we're doing things for each other.
So beautiful. I ask 3 questions of every single guest. The first question is what in your life, sphere, body, world needs healing right now?
Hmm, that's a good question. I think that my parents were both Holocaust survivors, and growing up under their roof, there was a lot of positive stuff that I learned, like gratitude, appreciating all the little things in life, and I think that certainly influenced, the films that I make. I'm looking at the little things. I'm looking at things that can overcome adversity. But I also think that, growing up in that household, it's easy for me to feel victimized, and I'm learning to be stronger and more aware that when things don't go right, or if somebody does something that I feel is unjust, that I don't get trapped into feeling hurt, and which is a comforting feeling, as we're learning that people who take on that idea of victimization, there's comfort in feeling bad because it's a familiar neurological pathway. So I'm learning how to overcome that.
There have also been studies done with generations that succeed the Holocaust survivors where there are real emotional, mental, psychological, as well as physiological ramifications to being
Yeah.
the descendants of that whole experience. It's very real.
My sister has had a very has suffered a lot in her life. I've heard that studies basically say either you become victims or overachievers
Right.
because you want to heal the world and make the world a better place. You don't want anything like that to occur again. So I've seen both the positive and the negative.
Yeah, I can imagine. The second question is what is your favorite view for somebody like you? This is a special question.
My favorite view, like i.e. landscape or visual view.
Some people take it that way, and some people, like myself, I think about my favorite view. It's the side of my kid's neck.
Uh-huh. I like exploring the rhythms and patterns of nature that I find everywhere or anywhere. Like literally like in a puddle where I see the light kind of bouncing off some water. I get mesmerized by looking at light dancing off that pattern. And that pattern is a fingerprint of the universe, and it's a little reminder how I'm just like a speck in this grand thing called life.
Yeah. That is a nice perspective from a cinematographer. It's exactly what I would need to hear.
Hmm.
And the third question, what does prayer mean to you?
Wow. You'd have to, what is your definition of prayer?
That's up to you to determine.
All right. Well, I believe in having a positive intention can manifest the results that you want to have. And I think and believe that if you just visualize where you want to go and keep that in your head and let go of how you're going to get there, what the mechanics are, but just see the end result. See yourself in that place. I've been seeing myself standing in front of a marquee with sold out theaters for a Fantastic Fungi, and
Mm,
it's happening.
totally.
And it's finally happening. And so, how do I get there? That's complicated. And it's sort of unfolding, and thank God it is happening. And I definitely would encourage everyone to go to fantasticfungi.com and check out their screening schedule to see where the film will be played, hopefully in a city near you. But miraculously, without an ad budget, we're selling out theaters because there's a story. It's not about the mushrooms. This is a story about elevating consciousness. It's a story of looking at life from the point of view of a mushroom and unearthing nature's intelligence. And when you can look at nature's intelligence, wow, that's a bigger aha moment than even taking magic mushrooms.
Right. And there's also the whole idea of the impact that this understanding has on the whole of this planet, on our healing.
Yes.
That's why you're selling out theaters, because you are right on time. You are coming in here with a solution that hopefully we can put into place. But this is a definitive solution. So thank you.
Yeah, and it's also giving people hope, especially young people, when the news is always about the fact that, with climate change, we may be past the tipping point. Life 40, 50 years from now will be radically different if we don't change our course. And right now, we're doing the opposite of what we should be doing with the current administration. And that can be very, very depressing. So what I love is at the end of the movie, a lot of young people have come up to me and said, for the first time, here's a powerful environmental message being shared, and they feel hopeful and they feel inspired that we can make the world a healthy place.
I will never stop thanking you personally, and to everyone who is involved with making fantastic fungi. Thank you for giving me a lot of hope and sharing it with the world. I appreciate you so much, Louie. Thank you.
Thank you.